So Chris, I was thinking that it would be easier for me to show you rather than try to explain how to use a log with the C300 footage. There are some real specific steps, best practices in color correction, and I can drill into that at some point in time, but I'm just going to give you some sort of shortcuts and quick and dirty sorts of solutions. And some best practices for being able to get your C300 footage to a place where you're going to be happy with it. So let's jump in. I've got a project here that is, oddly enough, footage shot by a fantastic cameraman. And I've just created a simple project, and this is footage from the Canon, and it's been shot with the Canon log or C log. So the first thing you need to do is you need to go into color correction mode. So I'm going to change my window view, the workspace. I'm going to go to color correction. And there are a couple of things that you need in the color correction view. You need to be able to see the lumetri panel over here on the side. And you're going to be toggling between the effects view, and you need to make certain you have your scopes up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on scopes, but I just want to make certain you know what to look for in terms of not going too high or too low, those sorts of things. A lookup table is essentially a set of instructions to Premiere in terms of how to interpret the footage before you start color correcting. And they're very specific. They can have particular looks to them, but I'm just going to go with a simple set of plugins as options for you that basically take the C-Log footage and convert it to 709 video footage. It's important that you put the actual C-Log file into your project folder. The reason why is that when you archive it and go to open up the project, if somebody were to try to use this project a year from now, they wouldn't necessarily know where to find the C-Log file that you use. So first thing I do when I go and create a project is, so I'm going to go down here and open up the folder so I can show you. And we'll go here and we'll go into Table Talk. Now you'll see that I've got episode 1, episode 2, and I've got a folder in here I've created called LUTs and Looks. Now it's got lots of different LUTs. I was trying to see what would feel best. But for today, I'm just going to use the folder that I created called C300 C-Log to Video folder. And in here are 3 different lookup tables, LUTs. And this is the folder that I've sent you. And you'll notice that this folder I've put right into the project. I actually have a folder in on my computer where I go to retrieve these every time I start a project, and this is the LUTs and Look folder, which has lookup tables for everything from GoPro to C300 to the 5D. And I just leave it there, and then I copy the lookup tables that I need depending upon what project, and that way it's always with the project and it makes it a lot easier. Okay, so I've got a video file in my timeline here, and I've opened up the color, and over here is the lumetri panel. At the very top is the input LUT. Now, when I click it, you'll see there's a whole bunch of options here. This is what I have stock on my machine, but you're going to come up and you may only see like 3 or 4 lookup tables that are in your machine. So what you're going to need to do is you will click Browse, and you will move over to the folder. So in this case, here's the hard drive, Microsoft, Table Talk, LUTs and Looks, and here is that folder C300 C-Log to Video. I've got 3 different, I can do HDL, True Color, or, and I'm going to choose the IRI look for now. I've not, the differences are subtle, and you can just try each one to see which way it looks. And so it immediately changes the look. Let me go None, and you'll see how the scopes jump. Browse, open, and it changes the color. Immediately we've got a little bit richer color, and the image is actually, by design, slightly underexposed. So the first thing I'm going to do using my scopes is I'm going to adjust the exposure slightly. And I'm going to start bringing it up until I just peak right at about 80% for this one with the skin tones. And you can see the reds are right about there is about, we've got some peaks at 90%, but that looks like a pretty good starting point. You can see the image already looks better, and all I've done is change the exposure. I can then go through and bring the blacks down a little bit so they're closer to 7.5% here at the bottom of the scope. And I can adjust the contrast either lighter or darker if I want to. Right now, I'm going to take the shadows and I'm going to lift the shadows ever so slightly so that I have good detail in the shadows of his face. I can take the highlights up in his forehead up here, and I can pull the highlights down just a little. And I could bring the whites up just a smidge. And now we're starting to get a little bit better. The color is not as rich as I would like, so I may bring the saturation up just a little until I have something that feels better. If I toggle back to Effect Controls and turn off Lumetri Color, that's where we started, and that's where we are now. And it's a pretty dramatic change. So let me show you again. I'm going to reset Lumetri, and I'm going to see that there's no input. I'm just going to walk you through again so you can see. I'm going to browse, bring up the lookup table I liked. I'm going to look at my scopes. I'm going to bring the level up or down, depending on what I've got. In this case, I'm going to bring the level up about here to where my whites are, I'm at about 80% with skin tone. And then I'll bring the blacks down just a little, crush them. Probably bring the contrast up just a little. Oh, not that far. And then in this case, bring the shadows up just a little so it feels a little more natural without losing the modeling effect. And bring the highlights down just a bit so his forehead isn't glowing so much, and increase the saturation ever so slightly. And that's a really quick way to be able to eyeball into the shot. There are two other ways you can fine-tune this. This is not a bad starting point. I may also enter into curves. And sometimes I'll take a curve and I'll attach a point here and I'll attach a point here, and I may bring the blacks down ever so slightly and create a subtle little S-curve. Blacks may be a little crushed just in terms of the look and feel. But again, I've just made the image snap just a little bit more. It may be a bit much. You want to be subtle. You want to look too cartoony. But you can see that I've just added between basic correction and curves. This is where we started. I've adjusted the color, and then I've just adjusted the curves just a little bit. If you have a color that is problematic, if I want to change, the color on this is pretty good, but if I had a blue cast in the shadows, let's say, I can make it a little bit yellow, and I can adjust the brightness, the luminance value of the shadows independently. I don't need to do that because this looks just fine. A pretty solid way to approach it. Let me show you one last way. When I have a problem let's say I've got mixed color temperatures and I want the skin tone to be correct, and I'm going to let everything else kind of fall wherever it may. For example, in this shot, I'm color corrected for daylight, but this light is tungsten, so it's really yellow. So we've got mixed color temperatures in this shot here. Well, I would want the skin tone to be correct, and one of the ways I can do that is I'm going to reset my Lumetri color. So we're back to where we were. I'm going to browse over to my lookup table, and I'm going to bring up my scopes, and I'm going to adjust the brightness back to where I want it to be. Using the effects control, I'm going to isolate the face, and I'm going to use the Bezier tool, the mask tool, in the actual clip, not in the Lumetri effect, but in the clip itself. And I'm going to just draw around his face. I just want skin tone. It doesn't have to be perfect, and clearly this isn't perfect. And now we have his face. And you go, well, how does this help? The great thing is that on the scope, in this scope here, rather than in the parade, but we're in the vector scope, you'll notice there is a diagonal line in the scope. And this section of the line up here is for skin tone. And you'll notice that I'm pretty close on skin tone, but my tint may be just a little red. And if I move the tint, you'll notice it will move the plume all the way over. And if I move it ever so slightly, so it's straddling this line, maybe a bit far, I can be assured that I'm closer to skin tone on my person. Now I can go to Effects Control, delete the mask, and I know that my color correction for the skin tone should be fairly accurate. And then I can do what I did before, which is I can crush the blacks, bring up the contrast a little, bring up the shadows a little, crush the blacks a little bit more, pull the highlights down just a smidge, go into curves, bring the blacks down, a little bit of an S, too much of an S. Go back to basic, up the saturation a smidge, and I think the whites, I think it's still a little, let's bring up my scopes. Yeah, it's still a little dark. I'm going to bring the whites up a bit more. There we are at 70%. And now I can feel pretty confident that my white balance, that the way I'm representing the skin tones is pretty good. Saturation, a little high, but not too bad. And hopefully I've got something that I can work with. If for some reason I needed to augment, just to change a specific shot, you'll notice that the Lumetri color is here. This is the base color. If I have something I'm going to use over and over again, I can right-click on it, save the preset, and I can call it back if I need it. But what's really helpful is that if I go into my effects and go into video effects, color correction, I can add another Lumetri color on top of my base color. And using this base color, I can create a look, or if I've got a specific shot that's just a little dark, I can bring that shot up without messing up my color. Or if I need to create some sort of secondary where the background is some funky color, and I want a look where I want the background to be hot pink, I can create that, use the masking tool, you get the drift, And you go, wait a minute, I can then invert it, feather it significantly, and while that's a really hideous look, you get the idea how I can create this secondary to get rid of some of the challenges with, let's say, a background that had a weird color or a secondary. Hopefully this helps. I know I've thrown a lot at you, but there are a couple of different ways to approach color correction, and holler if this doesn't make any sense. But that's how we use lookup tables. I've got a lot of different LUTs, so if you want to start using them for creating a look, but the reason why we do this is C-Log keeps the whites from being overexposed and the blacks from turning into mud. It looks really flat and gray, but we add the contrast and color correction to get a shot that looks better. So that said, I'm getting rid of the hot pink look, and hopefully this helps. Good luck.